think you know Adolf Hitler? You've never seen him like this before. Hitler's contemporaries, from his birth in Braunau to his death in the bunker, authentically flesh out the picture. Who was Hitler? Hitler neither finished school nor had any vocational training. He occasionally lived in homeless shelters or on the street. He refused to pursue a regular job. To this day, it seems inexplicable that he could come to power. Out of nowhere, Hitler became the Führer, leader of the German Reich, one of the most powerful men of the 20th century, starting an inferno that engulfed the world and brought death to millions of people. The nation worshipped him and followed him blindly into the abyss. But during his lifetime, he kept his origins and his life secret. No one should know how or who he was. Fascinating and oppressive accounts from companions, friends, and enemies, as well as the most extensive collection of archive material ever shown. Much of it, hitherto unpublished, reveal who Hitler was and how he could become what he was. A notorious liar and an unscrupulous murderer. The defeats increase. Hitler's military decisions, often taken against all the advice of his generals, are increasingly catastrophic. The fronts fall apart. After Stalingrad, most of the military leadership is aware that the war is lost, but dare not say so openly. The Western Allies defeat the Italian and German troops under Rommel in North Africa and land in Italy. In the east, the Russians drive back the German army. Finally, the Allies land in Normandy, but Hitler will not accept defeat and refuses any idea of surrender. After a failed assassination attempt, he feels invulnerable and orders one absolute measure after another, dragging Germany, if not the world, into the abyss.
The muffled drum beats of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the interval signal of the BBC listened to by half Berlin,
Here is England.
accompanied the gradual
England.
looming defeat.
Here is England.
Alda Schäfer, writer, memoirs.
For all capable minds, the Stalingrad catastrophe marked the beginning of the end. Bernd Freitag von Loringhoven, captain.
The heavy defeats of Stalingrad and Tunis that stand as everlasting milestones to the beginning of this era are, insofar as their reasons, their sequence and end are concerned, to be blamed above all on the man at the top of Germany's leadership, Hitler himself. Walter Wallemont, Deputy Chief, Supreme Command of the Wehrmacht.
Dubovka, February the 5th, 1943. Interrogation of prisoner of war Ernst Eichhorn, Regensburg. Captain of the 9th Company, 24th Tank Regiment, 24th Tank Division. A second front in Europe is impossible. The best German troops stand ready in northern France. Besides, the coastline is heavily fortified. Germany has enough reserves of men and materials. It will be able to fight for as long as necessary.
Up until 1940, Hitler looked younger than he was in reality. After that, however, he aged rather quickly. Up to 1943, he looked his age outwardly. Later, his rapid physical deterioration was obvious. Professor Dr. Hans Karl von Hasselbach, Deputy Attendant Doctor to Adolf Hitler.
I know that many people perceived Hitler as changed after Stalingrad. I wasn't one of them. Rohushmish SS Bodyguard Regiment.
I was also overcome by concern and doubt after Stalingrad. But every time I spoke to Adolf Hitler, the worry and doubt fell away, thanks to the extraordinary fascination and radiance of his personality. Hermann Giesler, Hitler's architect.
Diary, February the 19th, 1943. To justify total warfare, Reichsminister Dr. Goebbels was let loose on the public at the Berlin Sportpalast on February the 18th, 1943. Friedrich Kellner, court employee, Laubach, Hesse.
At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the long-awaited rally at the Sportpalast takes place. The number of visitors is overwhelming. At 4:30, access to the Sportpalast has to be blocked due to overcrowding. Joseph Goebbels, diary.
It was one of those party-organized rallies with patriotic intellectuals and actors among the tame audience, whose positive reactions were meant to impress the common folk via the film cameras of the weekly newsreels. Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production.
Engländer behaupten, das deutsche Volk wehrt sich gegen die totalen Kriegsmaßnahmen der Regierung. Es will nicht den totalen Krieg, sagen die Engländer, sondern die Kapitulation. Wollt ihr den totalen Krieg? Wollt ihr ihn, wenn nötig, totaler und radikaler, als wir ihn uns überhaupt erst vorstellen können? Bereit, mit dem Führer als Phalanx der Heimat hinter der kämpfenden Wehrmacht stehen, diesen Kampf mit wilder Entschlossenheit und unbeirrt durch alle Schicksalsführungen fortzusetzen, bis der Sieg in unseren Händen ist.
Diary, February the 21st, 1943. To my pleasure, I learned that circles close to the Führer listened to my speech in the Sportpalast and expressed enthusiasm. The Führer himself was so overloaded with work that he didn't manage it. Joseph Goebbels.
Stew Sunday in Korbach in northern Hesse. Since 1933, the NSDAP has propagated a regular, simple meal in families every other Sunday from October to March. The housekeeping money saved is collected by the party as a donate to the Winter Relief Organization. The collective sacrifice is also designed to save food reserves. Above all, for nearly 80 million people in the Greater German Reich, Stew Sunday is a forced commitment to the national community. After the proclamation of total war in 1943, the NSDAP registers the highest level of membership, 7.7 million.
Total war transformed me too into a soldier. I now wore the ice blue officer's uniform. There were 40 pilots, among them 5 women. Beate Use, pilot. Letter to parents in Cologne, Gärtlauken, district of Labiau, East Prussia, March the 25th, 1943. I was recently with the Mauritz family one evening. He has a building company and is a calm, quiet person. 2 months ago, his only son fell in battle. 19 years old, a hard-working, friendly boy. He was drafted in April 1942. I knew him. Now there are only 2 daughters left, 17 and 6 years old. The fatherland is entitled to every victim, the mother said quietly. But she and her husband were weeping. Marianne Günther, student teacher.
Address to the US Congress, Washington, May the 19th, 1943. I am free to admit that in North Africa, we built better than we knew. The unexpected came to the aid of the design. For this, we have to thank the military intuition of Corporal Hitler. The same insensate obstinacy which condemned his army to destruction at Stalingrad has brought this new catastrophe upon our enemies in Tunisia. Winston Churchill.
The death of a human being didn't bother him at all. He saw people as the links in a long chain, and he considered the first link to be himself. Children were in his eyes only the potential by which the greater or smaller living space of a people was measured. Christa Schröder, Hitler's private secretary.
The soldiers that I met were not followers of Hitler and only served the Führer unwillingly, but all approved of war as an indispensable phenomenon of life. The war is the ultimate exertion that you cannot dodge. This picture was deeply ingrained in them. Wilma Sturm, journalist and writer. The war as a dangerous child's game. These young men, trying to overcome their boredom with alcohol, are just 17 years old. Their military title is Luftwaffenhelfer, or Air Force Helpers. From 1943 onwards, they replace regular soldiers sent to the front on the anti-aircraft guns in the homelands. At the end of 1943, there are 80,000 young flak helpers. As a rule, they are deployed near their hometown. High school students have 18 hours of school lessons a week at their posts.
Diary, Monday, July the 26th, 1943. Mussolini has resigned. He's said to be ill. Last night, Hamburg, Essen and Kiel were bombed again. Henrietta Schneider, housekeeper, East Prussia.
While I endeavored to establish worthwhile targets to Hitler and the General Staff of the Air Force, our enemies launched 5 big attacks on only one major city, Hamburg. Although this action contradicted all tactical considerations, it had catastrophic consequences. Albert Speer.
The issue that divided the American and the British bombing commands centered on the prickly question of daylight bombing as opposed to nighttime raids. The Army Air Forces were convinced not only that higher-level, skillfully executed daylight raids could work, but that night bombing with its notorious imprecision would prevent a catastrophic waste of material and energy. Robert Morgan, Colonel, 8th U.S. Air Force, pilot of the bomber Memphis Belle.
We had known the main answer to the German defences for a long time. Strips of metallized paper were dropped for the first time on the night of July 24th, 25th, and the target was Hamburg. Like other coastal targets, Hamburg was particularly easy to identify by H2S radar, as the outline of water gave us a clear response on the H2S screen. Some 700 aircraft attacked, and the weather was in every way favourable. Arthur Harris, Marshal of the Royal Air Force, Bomber Command.
Diary of fighter pilot Hans Ahrens, born 1921, killed in action February the 21st, 1944. That first night of terror on July the 25th will remain unforgettable for us and the majority of all Hamburg residents. Personally, I'm glad that I experienced it all. As a soldier, it led to an ultimate, resolute hatred of our enemy.
Letter to Georg Zimmermann, soldier in Norway, from his mother, Hamburg, July the 28th, 1943. Dear Georg, we are still alive, but Hamburg de facto no longer exists. No house left standing, just mountains of rubble, entire streets blocked, dead bodies not salvaged, impenetrable smoke and fumes and fires still burning everywhere. Disintegration is in progress. No police anymore, nothing. Hamburg is lost forever. Magdalena Zimmermann.
When I travelled to the Badine from Babelsberg, I met an acquaintance on the train. He'd experienced it all in Hamburg as an anti-aircraft soldier. It smelled so strongly of corpses that you couldn't get the stench out of your nose. Leaflets were dropped over Hamburg with quotes from the war speeches of Hitler and Goering, without any comments. Erich Kästner, writer, War Diary.
Hamburg, July the 30th, 1943. My Hannele, words can't express what we are going through here. A government that cannot protect its women and children is simply criminal. My Hannele, if I could only hear one word from you and Georg, your mother. Magdalena Zimmermann.
When he travelled to Bavaria to the Berghof, or the Führer headquarters, then he went by train and at night with blacked out windows, so that he wasn't faced with the devastation from the bombing raids. Bernd Freitag von Loinghofen, Captain.
During the entire war, Adolf Hitler never once visited a bombed city. Albert Speer.
The toll on those who flew was horrific. 2 out of every 3 boys who flew missions were killed. And by boy, I'm talking about an average age of 20. The 8th Air Force had more casualties in World War II than the Marine Corps and the Navy combined. Robert Morgan.
Baldur von Schirach came on June the 24th, Corpus Christi. He had a long and detailed conversation with Hitler, the contents of which I learned from Hitler the next evening. Schirach said unequivocally to Hitler that the war must be stopped somehow. Hitler said to him,
"What is he thinking? He knows as well as I that there's no way out now, unless I put a bullet through my head."
That was their last meeting. Niklaus von Below, Colonel, Luftwaffe Adjutant to Adolf Hitler.
On September the 8th, 1943, Adolf Hitler attends the briefing at Army Group South headquarters in Zaporozhye in the Ukraine to discuss the alarming situation in the Donbass region with its commander, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein. In July, with German armoured divisions suffering major losses, the offensive against the protruding Soviet front at Kursk fails. In March, under Manstein's command, the Wehrmacht has been able to stabilise the Eastern Front after Stalingrad, with a hard-fought victory in the so-called Third Battle of Kharkov, but subsequently had to vacate the city in August 1943. The retreat begins almost everywhere on the Eastern Front.
September the 8th, 1943. It is a race of hope with the war, a race of death with death. What will come first? The death of fascism or my death? Is that only my question? Oh no. Tens of thousands of prisoners are asking the same thing, and millions of soldiers and dozens of millions of people in all of Europe and the entire world are asking the same. Julius Fučík, Czech journalist and writer, imprisoned by the Gestapo, executed 1943.
Mass execution at Berlin Plötzensee prison, September the 7th to 12th, 1943. 186 died on the first night. The men went to the gallows without shirts, their jackets thrown loosely over their shoulders, hands tied behind their backs, clattering wooden clogs on their feet. Victor von Kostomsky, German prisoner in Plötzensee prison. Memoirs.
Diary, Friday, September the 10th, 1943. Special announcement. We have occupied Italy, encountered only little opposition. The army is being disarmed. Henrietta Schneider.
Dr. Theo Morell, Adolf Hitler's personal physician. Diary, September the 23rd, 1943. 8:15 p.m. Examination after dinner. Strong flatulence, spasms from agitation. Stomach shows increased fat formation. Prescribed a diet.
He admired Morell and his art and was, in a sense, dependent on him and his medication. Albert Speer.
New Year's Proclamation, 1944. The year 1944 will make hard and heavy demands on all Germans. The monstrous events of the war will come closer to crisis this year. We are fully confident that we will endure. Adolf Hitler.
Die Feuerzangenbowle, the Punch Bowl, premiered in 2 Berlin cinemas simultaneously. The previous night, 1,077 English planes had dropped 3,715 tons of bombs on Berlin. Heinz Rühmann, actor and director.
Diary, Monday, February the 7th, 1944. In the East, the terrible war rages on. Henrietta Schneider.
Edgar Kupfer-Kobowitz, prisoner in concentration camp Dachau, April the 20th, 1944. Today is Hitler's birthday. It struck me that of 10 houses, only maybe 8 of them had flags flying, so people are growing weary. But it was still more amazing to see that even in the SS housing estate, only a few flags were flying.
Diary, May the 9th, 1944. Patient A. Tension headache left side. Legs trembling due to agitation. Invasion imminent, but where? Dr. Theo Morell.
Diary, May the 27th, 1944. An impression of an increasingly destroyed Berlin. Devastating. At the same time, Berliners are sitting in the sunshine on chairs amid the rubble and debris on the esplanade, as if it were peacetime. Ulrich von Hassel, diplomat and member of the resistance.
The helpful Mr. T firmly believes that Germany will be on its knees by September. And until then, there's nothing to fear, because there are no wagons to deport the Jews in. Besides, he dares to predict that in 1 or 2 weeks, the Wehrmacht will turn its arms on the SS. Ernő Shep, Budapest, Hungarian Jewish writer.
On June the 3rd, 1944, Eva Braun's sister Gretel married SS Section Commander Hermann Fegelein. They celebrated on the Obersalzberg. Fegelein had been a liaison officer in the Waffen-SS since the beginning of the year. He had fought, as one heard, extremely well at the front. Above all, however, Fegelein was a smoothie whom women fell for in droves. Eva set him up with her younger sister Gretel. Rohush Misch, member of Hitler's military escort.
Several hours after the marriage of Hitler and Eva Braun, on April the 29th, 1945, a ceremony that makes Hermann Fegelein Hitler's brother-in-law, Hitler has him court-martialed for desertion and shot.
The plutocratic world of the West can undertake its threatened landing attempt whenever it wants. It will fail.
Adolf Hitler, Order of the Day to the Wehrmacht.
They told us
announced their astonishing declaration, which was that by the following morning, a period of relatively good weather, heretofore completely unexpected, would ensue, lasting probably 36 hours. I quickly announced the decision to go ahead with the attack on June the 6th. Dwight D. Eisenhower, U.S. General, Supreme Allied Commander, Europe.
Hitler was told of the landing on the morning of June the 6th. He expressed relief when he received the first report and said now it would be possible to beat the enemy. Nikolaus von Biller.
The conviction of the Germans that we would not attack in the weather then prevailing was a definite factor in the degree of surprise we achieved. In the Omaha sector, an alert enemy division, the 352nd, which prisoners stated had been in the area on maneuvers and defense exercises, accounted for some of the intensive fighting in that locality. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
When I heard the radio report of the Allied invasion in Normandy on June the 6th, 1944, it brought tears to my eyes. I have not cried often. Willy Brandt, German-Norwegian refugee in exile in Sweden.
Actually, things are happening now. The invasion of Normandy began in the night of the 5th to the 6th of June. Rome surrendered long ago, and in Russia, the Russians are almost at the border. It's just terrible, but everyone believes so firmly in victory. It doesn't bear thinking about if we were to lose. Gudrun Himmler, daughter of Heinrich Himmler.
Until the end, he had a firm grip on everything, despite his poor health. What waves of faint-heartedness would have spread if he had lost his composure just once? Albert Speer.
It wasn't so pointless, fighting on like some defeatists claimed at the time, when at the end of June 1944 the Soviet offensive began from the central section of the front. In 14 days, a powerful storm tide swept over the German front lines, burying everything in its path and surging 800 kilometers forwards. Leon de Grelle, Belgium, commander of the Wallonian Waffen-SS.
By mid-July, Army Group Center had lost 28 divisions and 350,000 men. That was an even worse defeat than Stalingrad, even if it wasn't reported much in public because it occurred in summer and wasn't accompanied by the same tragic conditions as Stalingrad, cold and hunger. Bernd Freytag von Loinghofen.
The Führer then referred to assassination attempts against him and recounted by what good fortune he had escaped certain death. That he had not fallen victim to the bomb attack in the Bürgerbräu Keller on November the 9th, 1939, was only due to the fact that at the last minute his aircraft could not take off due to bad weather, and he thus had to leave earlier on his special train. Werner Körpen, Adjutant to Reich Minister Alfred Rosenberg. Minutes of recollected table talk at the Wolfschanze Führer headquarters.
On July the 20th, 1944, I'd received the order to prepare for the move of the operations unit from Mauerwald to Zossen, south of Berlin. It was a hot East Prussian summer's day. Mauerwald was located just 20 kilometers away from the Wolfschanze, where Stauffenberg's bomb exploded around 12:45 p.m. Bernd Freytag von Loinghofen.
I remember thunder combined with a brightly flashing flame. At the same time, thick smoke. After a few seconds of complete silence, I heard someone call. It was probably Field Marshal Keitel.
Where is the Führer?
Heinz Buchholz, stenographer in the Volksschanze headquarters.
There were agitated calls for a doctor. A bomb exploded, nothing happened to the boss, but the hut was blown sky high. Christa Schröder.
Heinz Linger, valet to Adolf Hitler. When I arrived, I saw Hitler, who looked at me inquiringly with big eyes and stared at my troubled face. With a calm smile, he said,
Linger, someone tried to kill me.
I heard about the attack from Professor Morell on the platform in Görlitz. His pulse was completely calm and as normal as any day. The doctor was about to tell me further details when Hitler appeared. On the outside, you couldn't see anything. When the train with Mussolini arrived, I saw Hitler extend his left hand to his guest. Paul Otto Schmidt, interpreter for Adolf Hitler.
Doctor, I hear that you're taking care of my friends. I didn't really want to bother you, but over the past 2 days, since the explosion, I have had a sharp pain in my right ear and difficulty hearing. My valet says it's because I shout too much. Adolf Hitler to Dr. Erwin Giesing, Hitler's private ear, nose and throat doctor.
Diary, Friday, July the 21st, 1944. The radio broadcast details of the attack. The bomb was planted by a Count von Stauffenberg. Around 1 o'clock, the Führer spoke to prove that he had survived. What would have happened if the Führer had died? The war would be over and there would be revolution in Germany. Henrietta Schneider.
His confidence, his faith in victory and his assurance, but also his power consciousness and delusions of grandeur now exceeded all boundaries of reason. Traudl Junge.
When Herr Hitler escaped his bomb on July the 20th, he described his survival as providential. I think that from a purely military point of view, we can all agree with him, for certainly it would be most unfortunate if the Allies were to be deprived, in the closing phases of the struggle, of that form of warlike genius by which Corporal Hitler has so notably contributed to our victory. Winston Churchill, address to the House of Commons.
Diary, July the 23rd, 1944. The criminal court that now has to be convened must be of historic proportions. Those with an ambiguous attitude have also earned the death penalty. Joseph Goebbels.
Diary, July the 25th, 1944. The enemy is already in Paris. Henrietta Schneider, refugee, lodging in Lesnica, East Prussia.
In the month of August 1944, the defeat of Germany was within reach. Nothing would be able to prevent it any longer. But it would not be our victory like in the year 1918, the victory of France at the height of its power, that marched at the front of the Allied nations. Paul Stellin, Major of the Free French Forces.
We heard about German defeats at the front, and that Germans were giving up their homes and heading off back to the Reich with their worldly possessions. This filled us with satisfaction and was a joy for our oppressed spirits. Paia Wapner-Levin, Jew from Vilnius, Stutthof concentration camp, West Prussia.
In September 1944, the generals at the front and the district party leaders in the Western region expected the armies of the Americans and British to take advantage of their power and overrun our nearly unarmed and battle-weary troops in an unceasing offensive. In this last phase of the war, Within 6 months, a total of 12,720 fighter planes were delivered to the troops, who had begun the war in 1939 with only 771 fighter aircraft. Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production.
September 1944, German-Luxembourg border. I peered at the town through powerful binoculars. To the naked eye, the Siegfried Line was just a landscape. There was a village on the horizon that was supposed to be sheltering 2 divisions of Huns. Lee Miller, US war photographer.
Ernest Hemingway, writer and war correspondent. Letter to Mary Welch, Hemmeres, Germany, September the 13th, 1944. Yesterday we came into the new Indian country after a fine wild day of hunting and shooting and settled down in a deserted farmhouse for the night. It was a fine day following tank tracks through the woods. Have had the place all cleaned up. I wish the people would come back and take care for the dog. They only had 2 books, one on wild beasts of Germany, a nice book, and one on the Olympic Games in Berlin in 1936. Have read them both.
Personal War Diary, October the 7th, 1944. Morning briefing. Beginning of the attack on East Prussia and Budapest. Long discussion with Goering. Station 12 heavy anti-aircraft batteries immediately to protect the Führer's headquarters. Werner Kreipe, General of the Aviators, Chief of Staff, Luftwaffe.
Königsberg, October the 18th, 1944. Speech on radio. Every block of flats in every town, every village, every farm, every forest is being defended by men, boys, and old men, and, when necessary, by women and girls. It is better to have the younger generation die and save the people than to protect the young ones and let an entire nation of 80 to 90 million people die out. Heinrich Himmler.
Personal War Diary, October the 22nd, 1944. Fog, situation in East Prussia unchanged. Keitel for relocating to Berlin, Hitler against it. Werner Kreipe.
October the 24th, 1944. Penultimate radio message from the 246th Volksgrenadier Division. The last defenders of Aachen remember their beloved German homeland. We are firmly confident of our final victory and donate to the Winter Relief Fund 10,458 Reichsmarks. We will fight on.
October the 24th, 1944. Last radio message. After a bitter struggle from house to house, man to man, the battle group Aachen has fired its last ammunition and used up its water and food supplies. The remainder of the defenders of the German Kaiserstadt are in close combat around the command post. Beforehand, a final farewell in unshakable belief in the victory of our beloved German homeland. Long live the Führer. Gerhard Wilk, Colonel, Combat Commander of Aachen.
Diary, Friday, October the 20th, 1944. The Russians are in Eidkau. Around 5 o'clock, there was a report on the radio about heavy fighting between Rominter Heath and Ebenrode. One still has hope. Henrietta Schneider.
We were still stuck in East Prussia. It couldn't be much longer before the Russians drove us out. On clear autumn days, we could hear the thunder of guns. Traudeljunge.
On October the 12th, 1944, when the military situation in the West had consolidated again and there was new talk about a front, Hitler took me aside and explained that he would pull all available forces together and launch a major offensive in the West.
That will be the big strike which must succeed.
Albert Speer, Memoirs.
Diary, Sunday, October the 28th, 1944. We listened to Goebbels last night. He spoke openly about the situation, which is not hopeless. Our room is warm. Henrietta Schneider.
In the first days of November 1944, we moved out of the Wolfschanze because the Russians were close by. Traudel Junge.
In the autumn of 1944, Freudenstadt in the Black Forest is to all intents and purposes still an idyll. In this amateur film, the absence of men under 45 reveals that here too they have all been drafted. Less than 100 kilometers away, beyond the ridges of the Black Forest and the Rhine, American and Free French troops advance. Soviet forces have reached northeastern East Prussia, and the Americans have been at Aachen, on the Saar and the Sauer, on the territory of the old German Reich since September. During the conquest of Freudenstadt by the First French Army on April the 15th and 16th, 1945, 95% of the little town will be destroyed.
Germany was under intense pressure. At the end of 1944, weapons production fell sharply. Trapped in the east, southeast, south, and west, Germany was strategically encircled and could not break free. Nevertheless, Hitler took one ultimate measure after the other. The Nazis suppressed without mercy the slightest opposition to their regime. It was clear to us that Germany was mobilizing its last forces. But at the end of 1944, Germany was still able to defend itself and put up serious resistance. Its military still consisted of around 17.5 million men, of whom 5.3 million were fighting troops. Georgy Zhukov, Commander-in-Chief, 1st White Russian Front.
At just 19 years old, Walter was also killed in action. I was sitting on the roof of our house that had been damaged in another bombing when I saw the postman bring the death notice. My aunt called through the house, "Walter has fallen." The death of my brother was a deep shock for me. Helmut Kohl, schoolboy.
Hitler stayed at his Berghof for the last time before the assassination attempt. He will not see his residence in the mountains again. On November the 20th, 1944, he left the Wolfschanze forever and travelled to Berlin. On December the 11th, he travels to the Adlerhorst Führer headquarters in Hesse.
Speech to division commanders, December the 12th, 1944, in Adlerhorst, near Ziegenberg, Hesse. If we suffer a few more really hard strikes, then this artificially maintained common front can suddenly collapse at any moment in a huge clap of thunder. Adolf Hitler.
Hitler revealed the following to a very limited circle of listeners. Due to a noticeable weakness of enemy forces in the Eifel region, he had decided to start the attack from there. The target had to be Antwerp. Siegfried Westphal, Major General, Chief of Staff to the Commander-in-Chief West.
In a desperate situation, perhaps only a desperate decision can help. Alfred Jodl, Chief of the Operations Staff of the Armed Forces I command.
On December the 16th, 1944, General Bradley came to my headquarters to discuss ways and means of overcoming our acute shortages in infantry replacements. Just as he entered my office, a staff officer came in to report slight penetrations of our line. It was through this same region that the Germans launched their Great Attack of 1940. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
German tanks have been spotted north of the city of Luxembourg. Rundstedt has ordered the tanks to advance through the Ardennes in nearly the same place as the Germans penetrated in May 1940. They're heading in the same direction again, to the Channel coastline towards Antwerp, in order to stop the Allies using the port through which their main supplies come. Stefan Heim, Corporal of the US Army, writer.
It was my opinion that it was necessary to play Hitler's last card to maximum effect. As a Gawker, I tried to get as close as possible to the front. The troops pushing forward were in a good mood because low-hanging clouds prevented any aerial activity. I was worried that the weather would brighten up. Albert Speer, Memoirs.
As long as the weather kept our planes on the ground, it would be an ally of the enemy worth many additional days. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
A report of the Supreme Command of the Wehrmacht, December the 18th, 1944. At 5:30 a.m. on December the 16th, German forces started to attack in strength along a broad front from the Siegfried Line and overran in the first advance the front line positions between Hohenfels and the northern part of Luxembourg.
The German attack quickly gained the popular name Battle of the Bulge because of the rapid initial progress made by the heavy assault against our weakly held line, with the resulting penetration into our front that reached a maximum depth of some 50 miles. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
December the 19th, 1944. The weather was so bad that I directed all army chaplains to pray for dry weather. I also published a prayer and sent it to all members of the command. George S. Patton, Jr., Commander of the 3rd U.S. Army. Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech Thee, of Thy great goodness, to restrain these immoderate rains with which we have had to contend. Grant us fair weather for battle. Graciously hearken to us, as soldiers who call upon Thee, that armed with Thy power we may advance from victory to victory, and crush the oppression and wickedness of our enemies, and establish Thy justice among men and nations. Amen.
The offensive undertaken between Echternach and Malmedy, consisting of 24 divisions, including 10 tank divisions, almost reached the Maas River around December the 25th. There's a danger that the Germans will overrun the front in Holland from the back, via Namur and Liège. Charles de Gaulle, Memoirs.
Our last major offensive in the West, with 300,000 men that was so gloriously successful at the start, failed in the end thanks to 10 days of radiant sunshine. The Anglo-Americans were thus able to deploy their overwhelming air superiority. Léon de Grelle, commander of the Wallonian Waffen-SS.
The Allies had expected to reach the River Rhine by Christmas at the latest. The Ardennes offensive prevented that. But how many men lost their lives due to this senseless delay? Walter Roland, industrialist, Commissioner for Tank Production in Ministry of Armaments and War Production.
Rudolf Jordan, Provincial NSDAP Leader, Defense Commissioner, December the 25th, 1944. When we were sitting together one sunny morning, tears appeared in my wife's eyes. Where will we be at Christmas next year? This was the question asked by the mother of our children, the question of the family's fate. This question would be asked in the house of the provincial leader and everywhere else in Germany. I was frightened because I felt that the answer was no longer convincing. But I had to remain the same person, Hitler's deputy, the spokesman of German hope until the end. I know today that it was the belief in a miracle.
In the days after Christmas, it was clear that the expected success would not be achieved. At the end of the year, the offensive had to be seen as a failure. Nicholas von Below.
Adolf Hitler, at the end of December 1944, to his adjutant Nicholas von Below. I know the war is lost. Their superiority is too great. I will prefer to put a bullet in my head now. We will never capitulate, never. We can perish, but we'll take the world with us.